Great, thank you. Hey everybody, I'm going to move pretty fast through a lot of stuff. I think we have like, what, 7 minutes-ish? Great. There's no concrete, specific scientific or technical path here. What I want to frame this discussion on is getting everyone accustomed to how to drive R&D at scale for these kinds of projects. So first off, this is what I think is like probably one of the most important graphs for humanity today. Thank you, Anders, for providing a ton of the work to do this. It's been pretty amazing to see how on track with this we've been along the way. So this is just for everybody, time, compute complexity, flops. The red is top supercomputer, yellow is top 500 supercomputers, cheap PCs, and these are different models for what it would take to emulate a human. And interestingly, as soon as we started hitting the level of complexity for the spiking neural network or neural simulation models, we're starting to see amazing results in AI. And this is not a coincidence. A lot of the people that worked on these kinds of models, starting with Kurzweil and even before, predicted this sort of thing would happen. I like to describe this as entering the fun zone. The next 10 to 20 years are going to be extremely, extremely interesting. I do not think you need, so this is a guess, but I do not think you need to go all the way into the metabolome or proteome or states of protein complexes all the way inside of neurons. I think it's much more about the connectivity. However, as we all know, it's extremely difficult. It's not just synapses. There's many different kinds of connections. We also need to figure out what exactly are the neurons doing internally and try to model them. We don't need to model all the chemical components, but we might need to model some complex function. Here are like some hot takes on timing. On AI AGI out of this graph, I think like for kind of a median version of a model is already, a model today can compete with median humans at randomly sampled tasks. So today you can take the current models and pit them against humans and already outperform a lot of humans at a lot of tasks. Getting superhuman AGI might be somewhere between 0 and 15 years, right? Like that's most people's probability distribution, highly compressed. Basic BCIs are here already. Sensory and motor BCIs will arrive in spades in the next 5 to 10, 15 years. I think transformative BCIs that are starting to really reshape what it means to be a human will likely arrive in the next 30 years, but are possible in the next 10. So it is possible to do this in a fast R&D context, but they're very likely in the next 30 years. So this is kind of like the high confidence interval sort of approach. Taking that view in whole brain emulation, I think like insect, mouse, and human are likely in the next 15, 20, 30 years and are possible in 3, 5, 10, maybe 15. This human is fairly hard. As we all know, there's like all kinds of experimental frameworks that you need to build in order to do this. The general loop tends to look like imaging and recording, modeling and evaluating, and then simulating. Tons of people have written about this. There's this broad loop that you have to build. Each one of these things requires a lot of different technologies along the way. And what I think is the most important thing is that we establish some kind of strong like meta loop here where we're trying a lot of these things at scale with really well-funded approaches. Today, none of these approaches are like large enough, well-funded enough, and so on to actually get a full loop going. So part of what we need to do is establish as a field-wide level of experimental framework that can do this and can try tons of different possible things and can share the data very quickly with others. So the way kind of like it looks like today is like, hey, we've had some significant successes with C. elegans and fruit flies. This is kind of like the default trajectory, potentially even stretching further out. Like this is already fairly fast. And what we really want to do is like compress this entire arrow, which is possible. But the context is like, in order to achieve this kind of engineering, science and engineering result, you have to approach it from like a fast R&D perspective. Fast R&D is real, it's possible. We have lots of existence proofs. The Apollo program and the Manhattan projects were like extremely early, very successful versions of this. Today it happens in things like the iPhone were built this way. SpaceX and Tesla are famous for this sort of thing. Science, which you'll hear about, operates this way. We need this approach. Now, just to set benchmark, This is an extremely intense and fast-paced culture to be able to do this. Usually organizes tens to hundreds and eventually thousands of people very quickly. By the way, all the AI labs today, like OpenAI, DeepMind, Anthropic, are organized this way as well. And these projects tend to form and allocate hundreds of millions to tens of billions of capital. So that they need to be able to reach that kind of scale. And usually they compress the R&D timeline by establishing extremely fast iteration loops. So we need a bunch of breakthroughs in lots of different parts of the problem, from imaging and recording tools to modeling approaches, simulation and evaluation, scalable integration. We need breakthroughs everywhere. And we need like a breakthrough in like the meta approach of how we organize ourselves against this. Just to kind of benchmark the capital scales for everybody, the Apollo scale is kind of like the 100 billion scale. When I was watching the talks from last year's, I think David had proposed a pretty good plan around it. And that's kind of like the scale. That's kind of like part of the prompt is to be able to, like, if you were to organize a plan of that scale, what would you do? I think these smaller scale, like, you need to be able to prove success in order to get to these larger scales, because the way that capital today and the way that teams get formed today and scale today is by bootstrapping through the smaller scale milestones. And so it's very difficult to try and form a project that just immediately leapfrogs to this kind of scale. You need to be able to show, you might be able to jump to like the 50 or 100 million scale, and then from there, like, prove a bunch of things out and then jump to the 1 or 10 and so on. But just for reference, one AI startup today, like, OpenAI, raised in the order of $14 billion in its history over like 4 or 5 years. All AI startups today are like around 50 billion. And so this is kind of like and that's just software primarily. Well, I guess all the hardware, they had to buy all the hardware. So I guess this is high hardware cost, but it's cheaper than bio. This is what deep learning looked like. And there was an extremely fast pace of iteration here that happened once the results were able to form a lot of capital and a lot of people out of the woodwork to be able to do this. And so we need to get to this proof point, this moment where the entire world realizes this is now possible, such that we can allocate tons of people into this. Yeah, it's highly possible. Just I don't think it's going to happen through kind of federal or donation funding. It has to be some kind of corporate funding, because most of these scales of capital today are only organized that way. Cool, that's it. Thank you.
Stay right there. You're going to get a question. Questions, comments? Yeah, Anders. I don't know. This is just for the recording. It's not going to.
Yes. And the analogy with AI is really interesting, because it seems to be very similar, that there might be strong returns to getting a really good human level brain emulation going, and even lower level might be relevant. But the analogy also suggests that you get a lumpiness of where funding and research happens. In the case of AI, we see that the distribution of the major AI labs is extremely uneven, and my continent, Europe, is kind of, totally and also ran. One interesting thing about this acceleration is looking at what places are most likely to be able to take off here. That might be very different from the places that are great at taking off in the AI field, because it might have to do with other things like having research hospitals or having the ability to do it. On the other hand, the scaling thinking that this depicts is pretty alien, I think, to Europe.
Yeah. So I think the bad news is the kind of like R&D scale. So this is like U.S. R&D. The rest of the world is about like 4x this total. So like all the world is four times this. The U.S. is 1/4 now. Used to be most of it, but now it's 1/4, which is great. However, trying to carve any kind of federal funding from any nation is extremely difficult. Being able to fund something like this, I just think, is going to be intractable through governments today, unless there's like a major war effort. I just don't think it's feasible. Interestingly, industry is now driving most of the R&D. And so I think it has to be a way of like forming capital from the existing corporations. What really powered the AI results here is that they were able to raise this amount of money, not from VCs, traditional VCs, but they were able to raise it from corporations. And so we have to find a way of like forming this. Like the hack here might actually be that you might be able to like figure out which companies will benefit from this, figure out what applications of their technologies, like optical instrument companies, AI companies, GPU hardware companies, get them to realize that this is an extremely good and profitable business for them to fund this kind of work, the same way that AI companies manage to do this with the existing hard tech companies.
Okay, quick one.
I had a quick question, which was mostly around, again, this like federal funding question, which was like most corporations, especially for like neuroscience, for AI safety kind of concerns, it's like probably are unwilling to fund like the amount of money required for collecting a whole brain like connectome on for a human, or like collecting, spending like $40 million collecting a lot of like large scale neuro recording data from macaques. And so how?
I think they would be. I think they just need a very, very credible path to that. I think many companies today, many of the AI companies today have enough capital that if they saw this as a very plausible pathway to get these results, and it leaned into their particular technologies tree in such a way that you can prove to them that it would generate a lot of revenue for them and success along the research questions they want to explore, they would totally fund this at scales of 40 to 100, even 400 million scale.
I see. So
I think it's
more like
doable.
making the pitch to the corporations.
I really wish it wasn't the case, but I mean, like, federal funding has just gone to hell. But when you compare it against like GDP increases over time, like it's just really businesses that are driving R&D now, and like we're talking about trying to do this like very quickly, without having to patch governments beforehand. Patching governments is extremely slow and expensive.
Thank you so much, Juan.